to all of the Charleston Conference attendees, both in Charleston and virtually. Ijad and I are both coming to you virtually, so it's truly a hybrid conference. I'm Matthew Ismail. I'm a conference director at the Charleston Conference, and I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Charleston Briefings, which is a brief book series. And I am speaking today to Ijad Madisch, who is the CEO of ResearchGate. And I wonder, Ijad, if you could just give us a brief introduction to who you are.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I would love to be in Charleston, so maybe next year. I heard it's an amazing place, an amazing conference. So I'm Ijad, I'm the CEO and co-founder of ResearchGate. I studied medicine, and I did my doctoral thesis in virology, spent some time in Boston, did their research in radiology, studied also at the same time computer science. I always was fascinated in science and research and how this can do good for the world. This is why I went into science.
Well, excellent. And I think when Sven Fundt, who we know from Knowledge Unlatched in Charleston, who also is now working at ResearchGate, when he asked me if I wanted to talk to Ijad, the CEO of ResearchGate, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I know all about ResearchGate. It's a paper sharing site that is sometimes in trouble with publishers over questions around sharing paywalled articles. And, it occurred to me that I know about ResearchGate. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a scientist. I know it almost completely from the point of view of what I read in different scholarly communications venues. And so I really have a very partial and indeed quite lacking view of ResearchGate. And there's a lot more to this story. So what I thought would be great is if we could just start with, where did ResearchGate come from? What was the origin of ResearchGate when it launched in 2008? Who was involved in the conversations? What were the ideas that were being tossed around? What were your models? What was your dream? I'd like to kind of start there so that we can get a more complete picture of what the company is. Where did it come from?
Yeah. So as I said in the introduction, I'm a scientist at heart. So my dream was always to do something big in science and to change the world for the better. So I remember in the 9th grade in Germany, you have like these library nights where you go with your school class into a library and you sleep in a library on the ground and you read books overnight. There were no blankets. We were just sleeping on the night. I'm not sure if this is the best way to deal with kids, but yeah, we slept on the grounds and we needed to read a book. And I read a book about HIV. And then the next day we need to summarize the books and we need to say what our dreams are. And then 9th grade, and I said, I want to go into virology and I want to cure HIV and want to win the Nobel Prize by doing that. So that was my ambition. My parents immigrated from Syria. So I always had the feeling that as an immigrant, you have to prove yourself. It's like this inner thing to show you are as good as the others. And then I went into science and research fascinated me. And I started very early when I started to study medicine, started my PhD in my doctoral thesis, PhD thesis in virology. And then I finished it when I was 23, and then I decided to switch research areas and I went into radiology. So I got a scholarship at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And I went to Boston and did research in radiology. And then I realized, these research areas, how you do research and what the problems in research are very similar and are independent of the research area you're working in. And a very good friend of mine who I met in medical school, Sören Hofmeier, one of the 2 other co-founders of ResearchGate, in addition to me, so we have 3 co-founders. We were sitting there and we're discussing, why is there not a platform where scientists can exchange knowledge and know-how? I was always struggling by finding the right people, you read a paper and you want to contact one of the people, and usually you don't want to contact the corresponding author. Usually you want to contact the person who did the experiments. And then you contact the corresponding author, but the corresponding author just doesn't reply because that person gets thousands of emails. And then we said, why is there not a platform, a network where scientists can exactly represent themselves, exchange knowledge and know-how, and share failed experiments? Because that is, as a scientist, most of the stuff you do just doesn't work. But you never talk about what doesn't work. You always talk about what does work. And that led to the founding of ResearchGate. And we were still studying. I was still finishing my medical degrees at the time. And the journey started.
Would you say that when the journey started, you had an idea about producing something that we might call social media?
No. And you will hear this from me quite often today. Like when questions come up, like, did you think at the time that you did this and thought about this and this? You could tell like these amazing stories when they like you sit there as, oh, I was thinking about this and we just all brought all these pieces together and then this came out. No. So in the most cases, especially in the beginning, we were thinking really from a tooling perspective of the networking aspect of the product. We didn't think about social media. We were just thinking, hey, there should be something where we just can show what we're working on and get in touch with other people, ask questions and get answers. So very simple answer, no.
Would you say that your model was the academic conference?
Maybe yes. So never thought about that, to be honest. It's a very good question. But if I think about what we did in the beginning, it was sort of an academic conference in an online environment. And beyond that, obviously. But it is what you do at the end, where you go to a conference, you meet people. And I have tons of examples from my own experience where I met people at the conference who just in random conversations helping me in my problems I'm having in my lab. And not in structured fashion, it was just randomly. We're talking about an experiment and someone says, oh, did you try this? And this your PCR? Maybe you should just change that ingredient to X, Y, Z. And obviously this could have been facilitated by such a platform. I'm sure I was influenced by that and by that experience, but I did also, again, I would say, we did not say, oh, we want to do a conference online. But I think all these, like my interactions with libraries, my interactions with conferences, my interactions in my lab, all this influenced at the end, this decision to build something like ResearchGate.
Yeah, and you're talking about it. You're a postdoc, basically, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how many postdocs then proceed to become entrepreneurs? I don't know, but you then moved into this very different space from doing research in labs and writing papers about virology into entrepreneurship. Now, what was it? How did you get the company started? And how did you expect to have to find external funding, or did you expect you could just bootstrap it?
Yeah, again, a very good question. So when I started, I remember I was in Boston and a very good friend of mine who was at the HBS in Boston, so the Harvard Business School. On the last day before I left Boston, he said the following thing to me. I will never forget. He said, Ijad, one day you will become an entrepreneur. You're not going to stay in science. But my dream was to stay in science and become a professor and doing research. So when he used the word entrepreneur, I didn't really understand what he meant with being an entrepreneur. I also never had I was never a business person per se. I was always looking at things from a scientific point of view. And this is also how it started at the end. I didn't feel as an entrepreneur when ResearchGate started. I didn't know what, I remember also Søren, very funny. So we did research together. So we did both virology and he was like he's 1 year younger than me. And we met in medical school. And he said to me, while we're doing experiments, said, yeah, one day we'll do a company together and you will be the CEO. And I said, I don't know what the CEO is, but can we go back to the experiments? So I never wanted to be an entrepreneur, but the entrepreneurship was the best tool to achieve what I wanted to achieve with the founders of ResearchGate, with Søren and Horst. Like, how can we build something which is changing the way we communicate science and how we find other scientists faster and collaborate with them? So in all honesty, it really shaped over time. In the beginning, we bootstrapped it. So I got money from friends, really only from friends. And then, at one point I met I got introduced to a business angel who just gave me a little bit more of money. Like I remember like the first 50,000 euros. It was so much money. I never saw in my whole life 50,000 euro at one place. So we were really like spending it very carefully, really try to really get the most out of a euro. So no, it really came step by step. And also I need to learn so many things on that journey, which obviously are not connected to my science career or my science life, which are all more like, entrepreneurship. Ultimately, if you look how we lead and how we build the company and how we design and products, it is still very scientific and very academic. So we have a lot of people in our company who are academics and scientists. And I think that's also some of the characteristics and traits of our company and the way we have our culture as well, that we want to, it's sort of a research project to me, with obviously it's a business at the end, but it is for me a research project in my heart, because we are trying something out in order to do something better and to find new results, which then will inform your next decision you want to make regarding the product you're building, which is science at the end. So I see a lot of parallels between how you do your research in the lab versus in comparison to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think learning entrepreneurship is another world. Being a scientist doesn't necessarily prepare you for being a businessman. I guess then one of the interesting questions I would have is, you went beyond the bootstrapping into venture capital, and you mentioned angel capital, but you went into the venture capital world. And I think when a lot of us in the academic world hear about venture capital, it makes us a little anxious, because you think, oh my God, now we're getting into Silicon Valley and things like this. And we tend to think, oh, well, now you've involved venture capital, you're just responsible to these investors. And so everything you do is going to be about returning an investment to these investors. So your business is just about business. You talk about your mission, but your mission is going to be to make money. Why is it you wanted to go the way of venture capital? And how is it that didn't just make ResearchGate about making money?
So first of all, I can really feel with you what you just said, because I had the exact same feeling when I started to talk to venture capitalists. And I can tell you, I said no to many very famous venture capitalists I've met in the first 2 years when I started to talk to investors. I always felt exactly that what you just described was like, hey, I need someone who understands my mission and who understands what I'm trying to achieve. Like, being a for-profit company doesn't mean something bad. At the end, the people, either in a for-profit or not for-profit organization, deciding whether or not the organization is doing something good for the world or something bad for the world. It's not the organizational structure. The organizational structure is a means to an end. It helps you to achieve what you want to achieve. So I remember very famous venture capitalist who I met, and in all honesty, I didn't know they were famous at the time. So I was just meeting them and say, hey, you should meet this guy, you should meet this woman, you should meet that person. I met them, I didn't know who they were. I never Googled the people before, because I was thinking it blurs your mind if you know who you're meeting. And I was always wanted to be like independent in the way I look at the people. But really the majority, 95% of all the people I met, until I met Matt Kohler from Benchmark, were people who were like, as you say, very focused on how do you want to make money with this thing, and how can we do the best for us as a VC to turn this into a gold mine. And I was always really opposed to that. I was like, no, it needs to be a good balance. It needs to be, first of all, the scientist is in the center of everything. And making money, there are ways to make money with ResearchGate if we succeed. And it will then also help if you're doing it right. And if you see making money as a product and not as a squeezing something out of the system, but rather like, hey, are there ways how you can use even making money as a tool to make scientists more successful? And Matt Kohler from Benchmark was the first person where I had a conversation with, who asked me, I will never forget that. And after a couple of slides where all the VCs usually ask you, how do you want to make money with ResearchGate? He asked me, Ijad, what's your personal ambition with ResearchGate? Why do you do this? And I said, I want to win the Nobel Prize. I really, I want to change the world. I want to do something good for science. And he said, yeah, I'm with you and I can help you to achieve that. And if we are combining a good business with a good mission, this is something which will be, and this is 10 years ago, this will be in 10 or 20 years ago, the new normal. So Matt always had that already like 10 years ago in his mind, that this becomes the new normal in the world, that you have to, and you should combine that. And we were ahead of time at the time. This is why in all honesty, it took some time. And then also the following investors, they're all like Founders Fund, Bill Gates, all these people. I always choose the people, not the fund itself. So Luke Nosek from Founders Fund is a person who, if you talk to him, he is into science. He cares about science. He cares about advancing us on this earth and saving, hopefully, us also from the climate crisis with what we build and what we do, and obviously all the other topics we're touching on ResearchGate. So I would never look at the system VC as a bad thing. It's about the people who are behind those VCs who will at the end decide whether or not you can do what you're dreaming of or you can't. And this is how I chose the people I'm working with in the early years of ResearchGate.
Yes, I mean, your assumption was that you have a mission. The more you grow, the more you can accomplish your mission.
Correct. And again, I knew, like in the lab, as an example, right? If you're doing lab research, or if you're coding, you need tools, you need software. It's stuff which is being produced by not for profit organizations. But even then, right? Like if you order an antibody, or if you order a DNA purification kit, where do you get information about that? Where do you discuss those products? And how much money we're losing in the academic world because we don't have a good platform to discuss before we order those things. So there's so much inefficiency that I knew if you build a proper system, it helps the scientists, it helps the corporates to get early feedback, and you will be able to make money with that as a company in between. So I knew that is going to work if you are succeeding in the mission you want to achieve by building this unique platform where scientists can connect and collaborate.
Was open science, I know this was back in even before 2008, was open science a part of your thinking in establishing ResearchGate?
Yes. So very early, we used the word open science as well. Like if you look at old articles, in interviews, my dream was open science. And you're like, we need to open up science. We need to be more open about the data we use, the data we produce, the connections between data and publications, like everything what we produce. And the research article is like 5% of what you do at work-wise as a scientist. But everything, the other 95%, and stuff you have in your brain because you're not sharing it, because of experience you have, that is what we need to share, and that's what we need to open up. And this dream came true. Like if you look at what's happening on ResearchGate, it's crazy. It's just like the numbers are, sometimes I don't believe the own numbers if I look at them. Like in the first 5 years of ResearchGate, 2 million data sets and research publications, etc., were added to the profiles of the scientists. And now every 2 weeks, 2.5 million are being added. So you see it's just growing so fast, which is, again, open science is happening, and it's happening all across the web, right? Obviously fragmented. And I think ResearchGate brings some centralization to that topic and to this area, which is, very needed in my opinion. But I think this is the first step towards a more automatic science world, which I envision for the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about open science, it sometimes, I think people think everything should be open. And then there's this silence to say, well, okay, if everything's open, what then? What's going to happen to the people doing research? What's going to happen? Who's going to interact with this material in a way that makes that interaction fruitful for researchers, not just an overwhelming experience? And I guess, from the point of view of somebody who's mostly worked in scholarly communication and I'm an editor of a book series and I have ideas about publishing and open access and all this. But, I guess one of the questions is, once things are open, what then? And I think we often think about open access publishing as if that's the central issue in open science, but that may not be quite the case. What is your view about how ResearchGate can act as a sort of intermediary in an open science, open access environment?
Yeah, so very, very good question. I think the first challenge we faced as scientists was the open science challenge. And I think we are getting close to a world where everyone feels comfortable to share data and research papers, especially the open access papers now, which is now, becomes more and more the majority of papers published in a year. Like this becomes reality now. But I'm saying it, what's now, right? If I tell you, go into Alzheimer's research, where do you start? How do you start? What do you read? How do you get connections to multiple sclerosis or Huntington disease researchers? All this, obviously, in the old world also wasn't possible. So we shouldn't say that this was something which was amazingly possible before all this open science started to happen. We had the efficiencies issues before that, right? Like we were in silos. Scientists, you go like you focus on like this one gene, and you don't talk about other people with So this issue existed before. It's just now with the new systems in place where people sharing more, it just becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Which it means, how do you, as a scientist, deal with that overwhelming amount of data and information? And my view is, and I always use this comparison to chess, the best chess players were, before machines existed, were human beings, right? So a dog never won against a human being. So human beings played against human beings. Then at one point, the first machine won against a human being, and then everyone was saying the best chess player is now a machine. But now we know the best chess players is a combination of human beings and machines playing against another team of human beings and machines. So seeing that combination, seeing the machine not as a threat and not as someone who's replacing the scientist, but rather as an ally to do better research. And I see also us as ResearchGate to going into that in the next 10 years is like, how can we build a supportive system for scientists when they're in the lab, that they are being informed about data and information and publications or bits and pieces of publication while they're doing research, to make good decisions about their experiments. And bringing a machine, or using this word machine here, but like this thing, which doesn't have a name yet, but this thing and a human being closer to each other, I see there a lot of potential to make science faster and create less redundancy and wasting less time and money.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about machine-human interaction, part of what we're talking about is how do you train those AIs and so on, so that there can be interaction that's useful. What you're putting into it makes a tremendous amount of difference about how it functions. But also in the world of publishing, we're talking about producing huge amounts of content that are very important in informing what kinds of AIs you can produce. What did you know about publishing back when you started ResearchGate, and how has your interaction with the publishing world changed from being a researcher working now with publishers?
Yeah, so when ResearchGate started, publishing was for me very important because it helped me to communicate my results to the world and to ensure that I have a career in science. So this is how I saw publishing in my life. Obviously, on the active publishing part, but obviously on the reading part, it helped me to inform myself about what's out there and what's new, and what I should know about the research area I'm working with. I remember being in 2003 or 2, going into the library, and the librarian, I remember her, like we were like good friends. She helped me. I see like librarians as I called them at the time navigators for me. Like they helped me to navigate to the right content I need to read and I need to find. So this helped me a lot to really find the right content and to do good research. This is how I saw publishing and publishers and content at the time. We never really thought about them as competitors, or we never thought about them being something what we want to do. We just understood very early there's something missing in the scientific community. Science hasn't arrived properly in the internet age yet. And we were, it's 10 years ago, and now we see more and more products coming up. But at the time, there was nothing. Like most of the stuff was just took out of the offline world and almost one-to-one to the online world without using the power of the internet. So we didn't really think about that too much, in all honesty. We obviously have always taken, a close look later, and especially with, now we're working with many publishers on new models. How can we help publishers to be more successful and to get them, the right content to the right people? And I think this is something which I'm very happy about, to see this evolution in the last 4 or 5 years of working on ResearchGate. Again, first 5 years, quite naive, right? I'm naive, I would say, in some areas. I deal with the stuff when I need to deal with it, when I see things make a difference in what we do. And my co-founder always said, let's cross the bridge when we're there. And he always said, we always had this attitude. Our focus was always the scientist, putting the scientists into the center, and how can we make them more effective in the research they do. So in the early days, in all honesty, we never really thought, we never had the publishers as a player in the industry, which, we saw as a competitor or something like that.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions then is about how now you are forming relationships with publishers and partnerships with publishers. For most of us, again, who knew about ResearchGate, was mostly because publishers were angry that paywalled content was being shared in ResearchGate. But I think, what you have done, in a sense, is not just to change yourself to be more with the publishers, you're also giving the publishers an opportunity to change themselves. And I think I wonder to what extent you see transformation in the relationship between publishing and a player such as ResearchGate. What kinds of transformation do you think could take place with both of you, both with ResearchGate and the publishers?
So I think the most important thing is always the scientist, right? In my opinion, the scientist needs to get the content he or she needs to be successful in the research, because we all will benefit if researchers are doing a good job. We have now the publishing industry where the majority of the publishers are positive with us, working with us, and try to figure out what's the future for science. And I think we, with ResearchGate, we built a system from the first day on with the scientist in the center of our product. The publishers had obviously that in mind. The papers created a lot of good things in this world. The format of a paper created a lot of good things in this world. But how can we bring those two things together? How can we bring technology and the publications, which are hundreds of years old, from the format perspective, how can we bring these two worlds together? So in the early years, I'm saying the publishers didn't really pay attention to us. Then in the middle of this journey, we had obviously some tougher conversations, of which some of those conversations ended a little bit in a sad place, and the majority of them did not end in a sad place. And now I think we are in this situation where we can sit at the table together, given we can with Springer Nature or Wiley, where we sit there, and also with Rockefeller University has recently had a deal. So we sit there and say, how can we change not only us, but how can we invent the future? And I don't like the word disruption, because disruption means always like you destroy something and then you have these pieces lying around and someone will pick them up fastest, and then things will look better for the one person who's fastest in picking up the pieces. but it's about invention. How do we invent the future of science, where we bring these players together and create, as an example, new formats of publishing, or other more innovative ideas around to make scientists more efficient and effective. So there's a lot to do, and I think not only the publishers will play a role in this, also libraries will play a role in this, and also universities will play a role in this, and I also think the corporates who provide the products for scientists to do a good job. So I think we will bring those players closer to each other, and will design the future of science with these people in a way which wasn't possible before, because everyone was pursuing something, everyone was pursuing their own goals, and with their own strategy. And I think now, with the people in the center, it would change the strategy of everyone, including us, with the collaboration we are looking at right now with the publishers, universities, and companies.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw that you had made a deal with Hindawi, for instance, to bring in all of their publications onto ResearchGate, part of the question I had when I saw that was, okay, now we're going to put all of the Hindawi publications on this site. And isn't this going to result in a sort of even more fragmentation in the scholarly record that people are going to have to deal with? And I thought, well, how is it going to help? What is going to be the impact of having these materials available on ResearchGate that isn't going to create problems of fragmentation for researchers?
Yeah. So I think the major difference from ResearchGate compared to all the other platforms, and this is also why ResearchGate succeeded at the end, we have this identity of the scientist, in which you can go, where you can go and you get everything. You get not only this one paper which was published by him or her in Hindawi, you get also all the supporting material. Where is that person working? What are the other papers that person published? So and this is all managed by the user, him or herself. So it's not managed by a database. It's owned by the scientist. And that's obviously a total different game, right? It's a total different situation we are in, because we give the power to the scientist back, who then at the end can create their own outer face and outer research representation with what I'm working on, what are my skills, which universities I'm visiting, what are the journals I'm editing or I'm editor at, like all these information, which usually are fragmented, as you're saying correctly, but it's now bringing all together, and the user, the scientist who created the content, who is part of the system, can manage this page on his or her own. And I think that is the major difference why adding content to ResearchGate is we have shown this in many research projects or data analysis we have done, how this is increasing the content interactions significantly. And this, if you just add it to ResearchGate, it happens like that, because the content then automatically is being added to the profiles of the users if they have this already in their profile. And then all the interactions, like all the notifications, they're just firing, and this thing is being embedded and integrated into a network of content within ResearchGate. I give you an example: citations. Citations are one of the best things we invented as human beings. But if you look at the old world, where citations is just text, it makes it very hard to get to the research piece and to get to the people. At ResearchGate, you can click the citation, you go to the next level, you see the new paper, and then you see the people directly, and you can get in touch with them if you want to. So it just makes everything easier. So this is why I think that adding Hindawi content, we also added a lot of Springer Nature content, and are also about to add more content from more publishers. This will change the way we discover content, because we socialized the content with the product we have built in the last decade.
And presumably the publishers with whom you are collaborating are seeing something similar. They're thinking traditional ways of discovery, where you go to a search engine and find articles, that this can be enhanced or even transformed by having socialized content to search. And I wonder, at one level, for those, for instance, open content is available to anyone can see it on Google. If you can just Google whatever is in Hindawi, and presumably it'll come up because it's accessible to anyone. What will people who are not ResearchGate researchers see when results come up from a ResearchGate site?
Yeah, so also there again, the ResearchGate site, when they come to a Hindawi article on ResearchGate, you still have all the social information, most of them publicly available. So if you're not a user of ResearchGate, obviously there's no way to get in touch with a scientist. So you have to be a user, you have to be a scientist. Also, one of the reasons why the quality of ResearchGate is so high and all the interactions are so high from the quality perspective is that we limited also the registration processes to people who have an email address of an academic institution or a corporate institution which is doing research. On the other hand, obviously, all the content is publicly available. So if you land at Google Scholar and then you come to ResearchGate and see the article, you not only see the article, you also can click around and you see the connections to other research articles. We are envisioning at ResearchGate in the future, and future means maybe even next year already, to create a second type of account which you can create as a person not being in science and not being a scientist, which then will give you an opportunity to browse through content within ResearchGate and become a passive follower of research creation. Because at the end, we as scientists, and the corona and the COVID crisis has proven that, we as scientists have to think way more about communication. How do we communicate science? So science communication doesn't end when we met at a conference or we meet on ResearchGate and we as scientists talk. The communication starts when we talk to the rest of the world. And I see there a lot of potential where we as scientists and part of that community, everyone who's connected to that, universities, libraries, corporates, we have a responsibility to change the way we communicate science. We need to. And I think the corona crisis has shown that how fast things can go sideways if you have discussions publicly somewhere about scientific, not proven yet, but scientific like data, which then leads to someone suggesting to take a chloroquine as a drug for fighting COVID. And the data was clear that this is not safe yet. So all this, we need to rethink the way we communicate science. And for that, we need to let everyone become part of that product, at least on a passive level. And that's something we still need to figure out how to bring these two worlds together, and how can ResearchGate be a interface between the rest of the world or the non-scientist world and the people who do science, and help them to find a communication layer between these two different parts of the world.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is quite important, because often what we think about social open access is who's actually qualified to read these papers. And okay, it's open, but there are very few people who can actually understand them. So at some level, it's very desirable that open science be mediated through expertise. And so ResearchGate at some level, because you don't just let anyone in, it means that the interactions with that science are qualified. And I think that's quite desirable, that people should be able to follow that, even if passively, to be able to keep in touch with the research. Now, I think we have about 20 minutes left, I believe, and I would like to open this to questions. Sarah, do you have questions for us?
I don't see any yet. Let me refresh this page. Gold Ballroom, are there any in-person questions?
Well, we can keep going, and people who can start formulating questions, and we'll come back to it.
There's one comment from Natalie in the Pathable chat that it sounds like an authority record for each scientist.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good way of looking at it. I think that what we're talking about now is that the record of researchers, the work they do, the outcomes and outputs of their work, the things that go along with it, like data sets and as Ijad was pointing out, failed experiments, experiments that can be put out and say, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. So if you're thinking about it, don't try again, or see if you can make it work. I don't know. I think what we had come to was really a discussion of human and machine interactions and how it is that this partnership, a human-machine partnership, can transform the scholarly or the scientific endeavor. So I guess, I'm curious, what are some of the projects you have in mind at ResearchGate that involve human-machine interaction, and how is it going to change things?
So when we started ResearchGate, obviously we thought about open science as the first thing. And then the content just increased. And then we started to build recommendation engines. Like, how do we recommend the right content to the right people at the right time? And how much do we recommend? How much can people even digest information-wise? How much can they read per day, per week, etc. So when we started to build those recommendation engines, we sometimes ended up, I was part of those meetings, with the engineering people, if we change this one item here or what this specific variable to that, the recommendation would look like this. And if we change this, it would look like this. So there's a lot of elements, and we know this also now from other websites. If you change elements in those algorithms, things changing dramatically, potentially. So what we need is, and we then took also, what we did then, we took the citation pattern, the citation graph, as a support for our systems, because those are built by human beings, right? Like when we cite people, it's a decision we make as a human being that we want to cite that paper or we want to cite this data set. So all this will lead, in my opinion, to a situation where we're going to have a lot of information, a lot of connection amongst these data sets and papers and people, which will lead to a situation where we at ResearchGate, and this is also something we want to look into in the future, is that you should be able, if you start a project, you should be able to say, that's the project I'm going to work on. What's out there? Help me to extract out of existing knowledge, new knowledge. How do we do that? Because there's enough, in my opinion, we have enough knowledge already in this world. There is so much happening every day. So much is being produced. But how do we create systems which are helping us to extract the right data, the right information out of existing information? I give an example. So if you look at papers in virology, you have the methods section in every paper. So we should be theoretically theoretically to extract those experiments, also look at behavior, citation behavior over time, sentiment-wise, see, did this work or did this not work? And we should be able to say that particular setting in this experiment is working for that particular virus or bacteria, and that doesn't work. That's not something, in my opinion, where scientists should, let's say this word, waste their time on. It's clear these things should be structured better, so we are not reading and starting at zero again, because this is what happens. If you're a new scientist, if you start your career, you start basically at zero, and you have to make the same conclusions which have been done by other scientists many, many times before. But it could be, in my opinion, there should be a combination between a system/machine and us as human beings, helping us to jump therein where the innovation is, where we need to use our creativity as human beings to make good decisions and to think about new pathways. So this is becoming, for us as ResearchGate, it will become a very important topic in the next decade, to prove and to show that this is something where we can change the way how academic research is being conducted.
So at some level, I know that there are recommendation systems that are based in the content, in the data, and that there are recommendation systems that are based in decisions people have made. So like if you go to Netflix and you watch this movie, it says, well, if you like that, you might like this. Whereas in the other kind, it's really more a matter of saying, well, if this is your specialty, then it would be, these sorts of things would be of interest to you. So when we're talking then about human and machine interaction, how do you conceive of those two different aspects of recommending, those different aspects of humans who have made decisions and machines that can go through the data and bring certain sorts of conclusions? How do those two things interact?
Yeah, so at the end, and that is the fascinating thing about this, is if a machine is making a decision about something, and you pick the Netflix analogy. So if you take, you should watch this, then you watch it, and at the end you realize, no, that wasn't something I liked. But what it does in Netflix, it just hones or refines what they show to you, and maybe to similar groups of what they, from similar patterns. In case of ResearchGate or in science generally, if just imagine you have a machine telling you, you should check out this. This might be something which is, we just found a gene, a DNA sequence in this particular disease, and we just found this somewhere else. That might be something we should pay attention to. This information can be falsified if we look into as human beings. And I think this is the interaction which I'm looking into. It's not just we are dumping everything on the people and nothing will be fed back into the system. It needs to be constant going back and forth between these two systems, right? Because we also know as human beings, like we shouldn't think that we as human beings are always making amazing decisions, right? How many times we have done research and at the end we just found out we just made a mistake or we did something wrong, or we maybe even faked the data, which we also have seen in the past. So I think this interaction, this constant back and forth between these two worlds will create a new reality, a new system or a new information basis, which will at the end comes as close as possible to the truth we are all pursuing. So, but yeah, it's a very good point. So the Netflix comparison, I just see there would be a systematic change when human being and machine are working at the same time on the same thing, that the system, the machine will say at one point, okay, got it. In case of Netflix, this is not bad. This is a bad thing. I should not show this. Or this conclusion just doesn't make any sense. I will never make this conclusion again. There's data which is proving that this drug is working against this disease, and that this needs to be changed in the system. And that is obviously, if you look at databases, there's so many papers, so many research articles where you still have data in it which is false, and this is obviously very dangerous for people who start at zero again, or even for non-scientists if they read that stuff. So I think we need a good way of aligning these two worlds and creating, the truth is a very strong word, but creating what we know right now about that particular topic in that moment in time.
And I think what you're bringing up also brings us into this question, but part of interacting with humans includes what you mentioned, falsifying data, publishing shoddy research, publishing things, like we have a whole world of preprints that are not peer-reviewed. We also have peer-reviewed research that is shown to be fraudulent. What happens when all that gets ingested into ResearchGate? And the engines, the recommendation engines are saying, well, here's a perfect article for you. And it's been proven to be completely fraudulent.
Yeah. So I tell you what happened in the old world where we didn't have those systems. We know that those papers existed for years, and I remember, like, from my own experience, I was doing an experiment and there was something wrong in a paper I tried to reproduce. So then we wrote a letter to the editor. It took 6 months until the letter to the editor was published in that journal. And then it took another 6 months that they replied, basically saying, you were right. But they tried to dance around the truth. And then we wrote another letter to the editor. It was ultimately it took almost 1 year, no more, almost 1 year and a half to really get to a proper, for us from a writing perspective, to the point that we knew, okay, now it's out that this paper or this one particular thing has problems. The interesting thing is, obviously, you will never find that because there's no connection. You read the paper many years ago. You won't find that there's no active links between these items. All this, obviously, in a system like ResearchGate is there. You can mark items as not being reproduced. One example, 5 years ago, this amazing research study, which was prevalent in Nature, the stem cells, where this group of Japanese scientists and scientists at Harvard published their paper in Nature, and then a scientist in ResearchGate published results, and after a week, he said, I cannot reproduce those results. And this became, Washington Post then wrote a huge article about it, and it became it exploded. And at the end, it came out weeks later that this whole thing was faked. So again, I think the chance of this type of system and transparency is not only going to make things transparent, it will also change our behavior, the behaviors of the people who think they need to fake data to be successful, because they know, okay, this world is over, that I can fake something, and it will, in the sea, in the sea of information, it will just be buried and no one will find it. These times are over, and I think that's good. It's very good. And I think we need to be strict here, because this has been wasting time and money, and I'm sure it also costs life of people that these type of things were just published and never retracted properly, and communicated that they were retracted. And we know that if you communicate later after a paper was retracted, it's still not being something which people really perceive as, I know, I remember that it was retracted. They still think the first impression they had of this, it works. And it takes a lot of reiteration on reminding the people that this particular paper or this particular research item was retracted because of data which is wrong. So I think a system like ResearchGate or other systems in the future will be creating that transparency, which will force people to know, or which will force people to publish the data properly, or they don't publish at all if they know that this just doesn't work.
It's very true. I think the transparency is the greatest enemy of fraud. So, Sarah, I believe we have a couple of questions.
Yes, you have 2 questions in the Pathable chat. The first one from Natalie. I love the idealistic view of sharing data for the betterment of society. Do you have a sense of how open the science community is to sharing information that could lead to someone making money, esteem from another person's work? I just wonder how many people are in it for the greater good.
Let me just read it again. I'm just having it in front of you.
Sure. I love the idealistic view of sharing data for the betterment of society. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of how open the science community is to sharing information that could lead to someone making money, esteem from another person's work? I just wonder how many people are in it for the greater good.
So I think if you look, again, I'm now talking about myself and all the people I know in science, most people who were in science didn't go into science for money. Just then you would do something different from that perspective. I also think that a transparent system, whatever system you take, ResearchGate or whatever will exist in the future, is a system where exactly these transparency also in in transparency in making people giving the credit to the people who created the work will also be easier in a technology world and a world we will live in the future. And I think this is also something which we have seen in research generally, that more and more co-authors are becoming on papers. So I think we are going into the other direction, in my humble opinion, that now, because the technology is offering us easier ways to show the credit and give the credit to the people who created that work, and all this transparency in citation and who is working with whom, that this, I see, in all honesty, that this is not going to be a problem. Scientists, I can talk about for myself, you go into science to do something good. And I always was focused on doing something good and also getting, obviously, the credit for when I published something, which is at the end the citation. And a system like ResearchGate or other systems will enable you to make that even clearer and more transparent and more in real time. This is also why all the reading behavior, which is an early sign of you're doing something good, is so successful on ResearchGate, because you see in real time that someone is reading your work and is acknowledging what you do. And you get even messages of people telling you, thank you so much for your work. I think that is, I think, because of the transparency, I see this rather as an opportunity to do something different here. You're welcome, Natalie.
Yeah, we have a couple more, 2-3 more minutes. So I think, Sarah, you said we have another question.
Yes, one more question. Does your revenue come from paid advertising or from something else?
Yes, the majority comes from paid advertising, and we have also a recruiting product where scientists can, or scientists and companies and academic institutions can look for talent. A third revenue stream, which we have just built up, or we're building up right now, is together with the publishers when it comes down around hosting of content. So basically, a majority is paid advertising right now.
Okay. Any other questions, or is that?
No more in Capital.
No more? Well,
are there any in the room?
Okay. No, it's all right. Let us stop then with one last thing that, Ijad, couple more minutes. You said that you'd like to win the Nobel Prize for your contributions to science. What would have to happen to ResearchGate for that to happen?
So I changed my view on that over the last year, over the last decade. I also mature as I'm older I get. So I'm 41 now, even though I'm wearing a Superman hat. My goal now is to make scientists successful and let them win the Nobel Prize. I changed my view on that, even though I would take it. If someone says, oh, the product you built is amazing, I would take it for the whole company and all. Basically, it's all the scientists who are using the product. It's not just me, right? So going away from this very egocentric view of myself from the decade ago to a more like, no, it's, first of all, I don't think I'm the person. It's the team of ResearchGate making the difference and the scientists who are using our product. I changed my view on that. I rather want to enable scientists to win the Nobel Prize or the Breakthrough Prize, which is another big science prize now, which has been founded in the US, make them the winners and help us all to face the big challenges of the future.
That's fantastic. Well, I think probably we should come to a close. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is so interesting. I mean, my understanding of ResearchGate is about 3,000 times different than when we started. So thanks very much. I really appreciate coming to do this session with us here in Charleston.
Thank you, Matthew, for this amazing conversation. We could talk forever with you.
I think so.
Maybe we'll come to Charleston next year for the first time. I really would like to. I would like to see this there. Like Sven told me a lot about that, how nice it's there and how good the conference is. So next year, hopefully, I will visit then.
I think, I agree. It's a wonderful place to visit. So thanks very much, and let's call it a game.